Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military with Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 18th of January of 2025. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And summing everything up, we can make a conclusion that the previous 2-3 days were very successful for the Russians. When talking about from the military perspective, of course. First, let's discuss the things that happened in Kiev. If you remember, during the previous 2 or 3 days, the Ukrainians were bombing and attacking deep inside the territory of Russia. We got lots of videos and lots of statements and articles that Ukrainians managed to destroy this or that oil refinery, that several ammo depots were destroyed, and mainly the Ukrainians were using missiles of the Western production. And today the Russians counterattack Ukraine with their own missiles, with their own hypersonic missiles and ballistic missiles. For example, in front of your screen, we can see the consequences of another attack carried out by the Russians during the previous 24 hours. This is the capital of Ukraine. This is Kiev. And according to the Russians, they reported, the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation stated today that in response to attacks and shelling of civilian infrastructure in the Belgorod region, the Russian army struck Ukrainian military-industrial complex facilities, including the Luch Design Bureau, which produces Neptune missiles and Alha multiple launch rocket shells. That was stated by the Minister of Defense. So this is very interesting because Kiev is not the only city that was attacked during the previous 48 hours by the Russians' ballistic and hypersonic missiles. Very interesting details and very interesting information is coming to us from the city of Kryvyi Rog. I'll remind you that just yesterday we were talking that the Russians, as a result of missile attack, destroyed the college in the city of Kryvyi Rog, and later we got information that Ukrainians were using this college for to train pilots not just of old Soviet aircraft, but also to train pilots that can use in the future F-16s of Western production. So in front of your screen you can see the moment when exactly the Russians destroyed or attacked the college in the city of Kryvyi Rog. And today we got very important detail about the yesterday's attack. For example, the Western sources reported that Danish pilot and F-16 fighter jet instructor Jeb Hansen was killed in a missile strike on the Ukrainian Armed Forces Training Center in Kryvyi Rog. This was reported by TASS to TASS by law enforcement agencies. This was confirmed by friends and relatives on the social networks. So this was, as you can see, very resultative attack carried out by the Russians on the 17th of January. And probably the most important videos are coming from the city of Zaporozhye. Very interesting video, and I would like to point your attention. In this video we can see, this video was made, as you can see, by some camera on the street, and I would like to point your attention in the top right corner, and in this moment we can see the first missile arrived on the territory of the industrial complex of the city of Zaporozhye, and right after the first missile there was the second missile. And I would like to point your attention that from this angle I don't see that those two missiles were Iskander missiles. Something tells me that the Russians were using something new. Those missiles weren't Oreshnik system. Those missiles most likely weren't, let's say, Kinzhal systems, but neither Iskander systems. So something big. Maybe the Russians used for the first time something new to attack Ukrainian positions and industrial facilities on the territory of Zaporozhye. And later we got pictures, proofs, photo proofs of consequences of Russian attack. As you can see, as a result of those two missiles, the entire building was reduced to ruins. Once again, most likely those missiles weren't Iskander or Kinzhal. That was something new. So as you can see, in 2 days the Russians attacked the territory of Ukraine 3 times, and 3 strikes were very resultative. As a result of those strikes, lots of important buildings and facilities were destroyed, including one Danish F-16 instructor, which is also very important. And when talking about the Danish instructor, we don't know for sure the exact number of students that were also killed as a result of Russian Iskander strike. Now let's move to the ground and let's discuss the situation along the line of combat contact. Of course, the most important updates are coming from the Velika Novoselovka direction. If you remember, just yesterday we have colored this territory in Russian favor based on the video that was published by the Russian sources. In this video we can see 4 Russian soldiers, 2 of them were establishing the Russian flag and 2 of them were protecting the flanks. Based on this video, most of the mappers have adjusted their maps in Russian favor in the southern part of Vremyevka. So most of the mappers colored in Russian favor up to 80% of the settlement. And today, during the 18th of January, the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation confirmed and reported that the entire village of Vremyevka was captured by the Russians. Based on the Minister of Defense report, we have adjusted the map and we have colored the entire Vremyevka in Russian favor, including the central part, northern part and the western parts. So this village was captured, and the most important, as a result of fall of this settlement, the Ukrainians lost the only supply road they had to support their forces on the territory of Velika Novoselovka. So this road is no longer good. Currently it's very dangerous to use. Basically it's impossible to use this road for evacuation. But despite these problems, the Ukrainians just this morning received an order to retreat, and currently the Ukrainians are trying to redeploy as many as possible soldiers and units in the northern part of the settlement with the purpose to cross the river of Mokry Yali. Of course, this mission to retreat from the town of Velika Novoselovka is going to be very dangerous, and most likely the Ukrainians are going to suffer significant losses. And the most important, most likely the final stage of the evacuation is going to take place between the 18th and the 19th of January, so this upcoming night. Because if the Ukrainians don't escape the Velika Novoselovka cauldron, they will never be able to do this. Another important detail that I would like to point to attention: most likely Ukrainian generals Syrsky, Zelensky will not allow the Ukrainians on the territory of Velika Novoselovka to abandon their positions, because 2 days left before Trump's inauguration. Obviously Zelensky will try to hold the town of Velika Novoselovka as long as possible. So that's why the soldiers on the ground will make decision by themselves. So they're going to be a very interesting situation and very interesting drama. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians began offensive in the direction of Velika Novoselovka, not just from the village of Vremyevka, but also from the northern, northeastern and from the eastern direction. This upcoming night is going to be very, very difficult for both sides. Now let's discuss the situation in the Kurakhovo direction. 4th day in a row, the Russians publish video of how they are bombing and attacking the main supply road and the main bridge between the settlement of Konstantinopolsk and the settlement of Ulakli. This is the only road Ukrainians have for evacuation, and this territory is under complete Russian control, fire control, without any chances for the Ukrainians to abandon their positions and to escape the encirclement. So there are very heavy clashes, the Russians are pushing, but as for the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything that can confirm additional progress on the ground in Russian favor. Now let's move further. Today the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of the successful offensive, the group of forces center managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Petropavlovka. This territory was colored in Russian favor a long time ago, but just now the Russians confirmed this information. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction. The situation in this area is very difficult. We can say that the situation is critical. Today, for the first time since the battle for the city of Pokrovsk itself, the Ukrainian deputy Mariana Bezuglia stated that today, on the 18th of January, the first sabotage on our reconnaissance forces, or just simply saying the first Russian soldiers, managed to enter the city of Pokrovsk. By the end of the 18th of January, we still haven't received even a single video or any other proof that can confirm the Russian presence on the territory of the settlement, but obviously if this information is correct, if this information is true, then we can start counting probably, as for now, just weeks before the city of Pokrovsk falls. Meanwhile, Meanwhile, the Russians are trying to improve their position to the west of the city of Pokrovsk by attacking the settlement by the name of Udachna and by improving their positions on the territory of Kotlina. There are very heavy clashes. The Ukrainians are not counting their losses. They are sending more and more troopers, more and more soldiers with the purpose to stabilize the situation and not to allow the Russians to break the lines before Trump's inauguration. Nobody knows what is going to happen after the 20th of January, but as for now, the Ukrainians are doing all they can with the purpose not to allow the Russians to get additional territories. They want to show Trump that the situation is stable despite the losses, despite the fact that Ukrainians needed to retreat every single day. Now let's move further. And let's discuss the situation in the Chasiv Yar direction. When talking about this territory, today on the 18th of 2025, or the 18th of January of 2025, the turning point occurred. According to information we have, the Russians, as a result of fast lightning attack, managed to improve their positions, to break through the Ukraine defense belt, and to take under control the southern part of the citadel of the city of Chasiv Yar. This is the moment when the Russians managed to take under control the most southern part of the citadel. In this video, I would like to point your attention to the next building, this building. Just take a look at this building, just take a look at the shape of this building, and when we go to the map, we're gonna find this building here. This is it. So it's like the letter R, and the Russians managed to establish complete control over this territory and to cut the Ukrainians that were located on the territory of the central Chasiv Yar from supply and support, and the most important, these soldiers were cut from evacuation and from any possibilities to escape the upcoming cauldron and the upcoming encirclement. Obviously, that Russian offensive operation was fast lightning, very interesting. Most likely the Ukrainians didn't expect that their defense will collapse in this area, but this collapse happened. What the Ukrainians are planning to do next? Obviously, due to this critical situation, the Ukrainians will try to counterattack this upcoming night between the 18th and the 19th of January with the purpose to unblock their forces and allow them to fall back from this territory, or just to stabilize the situation, because once again, Trump's inauguration is going to happen in 2 days, and this is very important for the Ukrainians to hold their lines as long as possible, but something tells me that this is not going to happen. Another important thing that I would like to point to attention is that the battle for the city of Toretsk and the battle for the city of Chasiv Yar are finishing almost at the same time. So we see that these days the Russians obviously will announce about complete control over the city of Toretsk, and most likely these days the Russians are going to secure at least the northern part and the central part of Chasiv Yar. And by the end of January, most likely the Russian forces will be able to reach this red line, and this is obviously the beginning of the battle for Konstantinovka. And as you can see from this configuration, the Russians are planning to attack the city of Konstantinovka from the south, the Russians are going to attack from the southeast, the Russians most likely will attack the city of Konstantinovka from the east, and of course the Russians will try to flank this territory from the northeast. Something tells me that the battle for Konstantinovka is going to be very fast. The Ukrainians most likely will not be able to hold their lines, and if the city of Konstantinovka falls, this might be the beginning of complete collapse of the Ukrainian defense and Ukrainian positions in the Slavyansk agglomeration and in the area of Slavyansk. And we are talking about such towns and cities like Konstantinovka, Alexandrovo, Drushkovka, Kramatorsk, Slavyansk, and of course the city of Siversk. Now let's move further. We have lots of very interesting updates from the Liman direction. Today we have the video, very important video that was published by the Ukrainian side. In this video we can see how the Ukrainians artillerymen were bombing and attacking the Russian positions to the west of the settlement of Ivanovka. Based on this video we have adjusted the map in Russian favor. Furthermore, today the Russians reported that that's for the first time since the Russians managed to establish their foothold on the Ukrainian side of the river of Zhiribets, that's around the village of Ivanovka, the Ukrainians, the armed force of Ukraine, attempted to carry out 3 attacks on the positions of the Russian Federation. The Russians are saying that those attacks were the biggest since ever. Those attacks were repelled by the Russians. The Ukrainians were using forces of the 60th and 112th brigades, and as a result of those counterattacks, the Ukrainians suffered significant losses, and just during those 3 attempts to attack, the Ukrainians lost from 60 till 70 soldiers. Now the Ukrainians are regrouping, and while the Ukrainians are regrouping, the Russians continue offensive, and during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly in the southern direction and in the northern direction. And I'll remind you that according to geolocations that we received from this area, we can make a conclusion that most likely, as for this stage of the Liman offensive operation, the Russians are trying to improve their foothold on the Ukrainian side of the river of Zherebets and to create a very strong positions in this area, which will allow the Russians to continue advancing further in the southwestern direction. And when talking about the city, the town of Liman, currently the distance between the town itself and the edge Russian positions in the vicinity of Ivanovka is already less than 12 kilometers. Obviously, this late winter and early spring, we are going to see this third battle for Liman. It's not going to happen tomorrow or the day after. Once again, in the late winter military campaign or early spring. Now let's discuss the situation in the northern, in the central and the northern Kupyansk direction. As you can see, we have a lots of icons. As for the previous 24 hours, mainly the Russians were focused on regrouping after withdrawing the Ukrainian reserves and reinforcements that arrive in this area with the purpose to stabilize the situation. It's very difficult to understand how long it needed for the Russians for this regrouping, but obviously very soon they will continue offensive operation in the direction of the settlement of Boguslavka, Zelený Gai and Barova. Now let's move in the northern direction. We have several updates from the Suja area. As for this territory, during the previous 24 hours, the sources reported about very heavy clashes on the ground. The Russians were attacking almost everywhere, but despite all those talks, rumors and speculations and updates, we don't see any changes on the ground. So maybe the Russians are waiting for better weather, maybe the Ukrainians managed to bring additional forces and they managed to stabilize the situation. It is very difficult to say, but obviously sooner or later the Russians will be able to break the situation and they will continue offensive. Why I'm telling you this, because today we got a lot of very interesting icons from the settlement, from the vicinity of the settlement of Tetkina. The Russian sources published the video of how they were after withdrawing the Ukrainian positions in the area, in the Sumy area to the south of Tetkina. A lot of after withdrawn attacks, temporary deployment points were attacked by the Russians, warehouses were destroyed by the Russians, ammo depots, some, cars, vehicles that Ukrainians were using for different purposes. So what is important from this video is that the Russians intensified their activity exactly in this direction, and obviously the main purpose of the Russian activization in this area is possible offensive operation deep inside of the Sumy region. But what is the purpose of this attack if the Russians still haven't resolved all their issues on the territory of the Suja direction? The thing is that the Ukrainians from the Suja direction have their supply and support from the city of Sumy. This is a very big city, several hundred of thousand people, and there is a forest, very huge forest that Ukrainians can use to hide equipment and many other purposes. And from the city of Sumy, the Ukrainians send their forces to the Suji direction, and from the Suji area, the Ukrainians are taking back wounded to make rotation and many other purposes. So, but the city of Sumy, despite the fact that this is a very powerful, stronghold and strategical city in the northeastern part of Ukraine, the main problem of the city is that the Ukrainians have just several ways to supply their contingent on the territory of this agglomeration. And the most important way to supply Ukrainians is to use the railways. And if the Russians are able to carry out fast lightning and very successful operation from the city of Tetkina in the southern direction, and to take under control the settlement of Vorozhba and the settlement of Belopolye, the Russians will be able to resolve one of the most important tasks, to cut the city of Sumy from supply and support that comes from the city of Kiev. This is going to be obviously significant victory. Furthermore, the Ukrainians will still have possibilities to support their forces from the city of Kharkiv, but maybe in this case the Russians will begin offensive from the settlement of Kozinka and Graivoron region in the direction of the settlement Kurakhovo. If the Russians are able to cut this part of the railways, then the city of Sumy will be cut completely from supply and support. We are talking about railway supply. Of course, the Ukrainians will not lose any possibilities to support their forces with the regular roads, but obviously this is going to be much more expensive and not so effective when using the railways. And obviously without railway support, Ukrainians will not be able to defend their positions in the Sumy direction so effectively and so successful as they do right now. So most likely in the very near future, first we are going to see this flanks operation with the purpose to cut city of Sumy from supply, and only then the Russians will begin their final offensive in the direction of Suja with the purpose then to enter the Sumy region itself and to attack the city of Sumy. So this is it, and that's it for the short video for today. Military summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.